When the James Webb Space Telescope captures something impossible beyond the edge of observable space, a team of scientists discovers a region where light itself reverses direction. The transmissions reveal structures that shouldn't exist, and an eerie signal that sounds disturbingly human. What starts as humanity's greatest scientific discovery quickly becomes our most terrifying nightmare. The universe isn't empty. Something vast and ancient has been waiting in the darkness, and now it knows we're here. What happens when humanity realizes we were never meant to see what lies beyond? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck window, her reflection ghosting across the star-filled darkness beyond. At 58, she carried the weight of 3 decades in astrophysics with a quiet dignity that her colleagues respected, even revered. The Deep Space Observatory perched on a remote mesa in New Mexico, far from city lights and closer to the heavens than most people would ever get. Tonight, the air held that particular stillness that came before something changed, though Sarah couldn't have known that then. Her hands, steady despite the years, cradled a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. She'd developed the habit during her graduate school days, forgetting to drink while lost in data streams and celestial mechanics. Her late husband, Michael, used to joke that she'd married the stars before she'd married him. He hadn't been entirely wrong. 5 years since his death, and she still reached for him in the morning, still turned to share a discovery with empty air. The observatory hummed with its night rhythm. Computers processed terabytes of data from the James Webb Space Telescope, that magnificent instrument floating in the darkness beyond Earth's orbit. Sarah had fought for a decade to secure primary observation time on Webb's schedule. Her proposal, studying the cosmic microwave background radiation at unprecedented resolution, represented the culmination of her career. If she could map the universe's earliest moments with enough precision, she might finally understand the fundamental forces that shaped everything. "Still here, Sarah?" Dr. Marcus Webb emerged from the data analysis room, his salt and pepper beard catching the monitor's blue glow. Marcus had been her closest colleague for 20 years, since they'd worked together on the Hubble servicing mission. He understood her silences, her need to process information through contemplation rather than conversation. "The Webb's completing its deep field scan of Sector 719, she said, not turning from the window. "I wanted to be here when the first images processed." Marcus joined her at the window, 2 scientists standing vigil over mysteries they'd spent lifetimes pursuing. "You know the data won't finish processing until morning. You should go home. Emma called the main line looking for you." Sarah's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Her daughter, 28 years old, and they'd barely spoken in 3 years. Not since the argument about priorities and presence, and all the times Sarah had chosen the observatory over family dinners, over birthdays, over being present. Michael's funeral had been civil, strained. After that, silence. "I'll call her tomorrow," Sarah said, though they both knew she probably wouldn't. The observatory sprawled across 3 buildings connected by enclosed walkways. The main telescope facility housed the control center where Sarah now stood, surrounded by curved monitors displaying real-time data feeds from instruments scattered across the electromagnetic spectrum. The adjacent building held the supercomputers that transformed raw photon counts into images of cosmic grandeur. The 3rd building, smallest and oldest, contained offices and a small residential wing for overnight staff. Sarah had practically lived in that residential wing since Michael's death. Her house in town felt too large, too empty, too full of memories that hurt to touch. Here, surrounded by the mathematics of infinity, she could lose herself in work that mattered. Work that would outlast her, that would speak her name to future generations of astronomers who would build upon her discoveries. "Dr. Chen?" A young voice broke through her reverie. James Park, their newest team member, barely 30 and brilliant in ways that reminded Sarah of her younger self. He carried that same hunger for understanding, that need to push beyond the known. The preliminary data from the Sector 719 scan just came through. "You're going to want to see this." Something in his voice carried an edge that made both Sarah and Marcus turn from the window. James's face, usually animated with enthusiasm, had gone pale. His hands trembled slightly as he held a tablet. "What is it?" Marcus asked, already moving toward the data room. "I don't know," James said, and those 3 words contained a universe of uncertainty. "The photometry readings don't make sense. The spectroscopic analysis is showing something that shouldn't be possible." Sarah took the tablet, her trained eye scanning the columns of numbers and graphs that would look like abstract art to anyone outside their field. Her breath caught. The data showed light signatures from a region approximately 13.8 billion light-years distant, right at the edge of the observable universe. But the wavelength shifts were wrong, backwards. "This has to be an equipment malfunction," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Light doesn't behave like this." "That's what I thought," James said. "I ran 3 separate diagnostic checks. The instruments are functioning perfectly. I pulled the raw data from Webb directly, bypassed our processing entirely. It's the same. Dr. Chen, the light from this region appears to be moving in reverse." Marcus leaned over Sarah's shoulder, studying the tablet. His expression shifted from skepticism to confusion to something approaching fear. "That's not possible. Light travels forward through space-time. That's fundamental. That's absolute, unless space-time itself is moving backwards in that region," Sarah said quietly, her mind already racing through implications, through equations, through every piece of knowledge she'd accumulated over 30 years of studying the cosmos. "Show me the visual spectrum data." They moved as one into the data analysis room, a space that always reminded Sarah of a submarine's control center. Curved walls lined with monitors, each displaying different aspects of the cosmos in false colors that made the invisible visible. Radio waves rendered in red, X-rays in purple, infrared in amber. The James Webb specialized in infrared, seeing heat signatures from the universe's earliest moments, from stars being born in clouds of cosmic dust. James pulled up the visual reconstruction on the main screen. The image resolved slowly, pixel by pixel, as the computer translated photon wavelengths into something human eyes could comprehend. What emerged made Sarah's coffee cup slip from her fingers. It shattered on the floor, but she didn't notice. The region of space they'd designated Sector 719 showed a patch of darkness deeper than the surrounding void. Not the simple absence of light, but something more profound, an anti-light if such a thing could exist. And within that darkness, structures, geometric patterns that suggested order, intention, design. They stretched across what had to be millions of light years, forming shapes that hurt to look at directly, angles that seemed to fold in on themselves in ways that 3-dimensional space shouldn't allow. "My God," Marcus whispered. It wasn't an exclamation. It was a prayer, or perhaps a plea. Sarah forced herself to breathe, to think, to apply the scientific method she'd trusted her entire career. Zoom in on Sector 719 Alpha. The central structure. The image expanded. The structure became clearer, more defined, more impossible. It resembled nothing so much as a vast eye, or perhaps a spiral, or perhaps something for which human language had no adequate description. The light reversal phenomenon seemed to emanate from its center, rippling outward in waves that defied causality. "We need to run a full spectroscopic analysis," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Map every wavelength, every emission line, every absorption signature. I want to know what this is made of, if it's made of anything at all." "Dr. Chen," James said hesitantly, "there's something else." The initial scans detected what might be an electromagnetic signal embedded in the light patterns. "It's very faint, but it's there. And it's not random noise." Sarah turned to face him. "A signal? You mean a transmission?" "I mean something organized. Something that repeats with variation, like language or code. I haven't tried to decode it yet. I thought you should know first." The room fell silent, except for the gentle hum of cooling fans and the distant rumble of the supercomputers processing endless streams of cosmic data. Sarah felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the sense that they stood at a threshold between one understanding of reality and another. Marcus recovered first. We need to document everything, triple-check every measurement. If this is real, if this is what it appears to be, we're looking at the most significant discovery in human history. And if it's not real, James asked, then we've found the most elaborate equipment malfunction in the history of astronomy, Sarah said. Either way, we proceed carefully. We verify, we don't jump to conclusions. And we don't tell anyone outside this room until we're certain. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of analysis and verification. Sarah called in their other team members, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, their instrumentation specialist, who confirmed the Webb systems were functioning flawlessly, Dr. Thomas Wright, their data analyst, who ran statistical tests that showed the signal couldn't be random chance. By dawn, 5 scientists stood in the data room, staring at an image that shouldn't exist and data that defied explanation. Sarah's leather-bound mission journal lay open on the desk beside her, its pages filled with decades of meticulous observations. She'd started keeping it during her graduate work, a habit borrowed from the old explorers who'd charted Earth's unknown territories. Every significant observation, every breakthrough, every failure she'd recorded in her precise handwriting. This journal represented her life's work, the accumulated knowledge of a career spent decoding the universe's secrets. Now she wrote a new entry, her hand moving across the page with deliberate care. Day 1 of anomaly observation. Sector 719 shows evidence of light reversal phenomenon. Structures visible that suggest non-natural origin. Signal detected. Implications unknown. Further investigation required. Simple words for a discovery that might rewrite everything humanity understood about existence. The sun rose over the mesa, painting the New Mexico landscape in shades of gold and amber. Sarah watched the dawn through the observatory windows, feeling suddenly old, suddenly aware of how small she was against the vastness she'd devoted her life to studying. Somewhere out there, 13.8 billion light-years away, something existed that shouldn't be possible. And somehow across that incomprehensible distance, it had sent a signal. Marcus brought her fresh coffee, real coffee this time, hot enough to burn. "You need to sleep," he said. "We all do. This will still be here after we rest, will it?" Sarah asked. "Or will we wake up and find it was all a processing error, a cosmic joke our tired minds played on us?" Either way, exhaustion won't help us understand it. Sarah knew he was right, but sleep felt impossible. Her mind raced through equations and possibilities, through everything she'd learned about light and space-time, and the fundamental laws that governed reality. Every scenario she constructed collapsed under the weight of the impossibility they'd observed. Her phone buzzed. Emma. Sarah stared at the screen, guilt and longing warring in her chest. She let it go to voicemail, telling herself she'd call back later, after she'd had time to process what they'd discovered. The same excuse she'd used 100 times before, the same lie that had carved the distance between them. "You should answer that," Marcus said gently. "I will, later. That's what you said 3 years ago, and the year before that." "Sarah, I know this discovery feels important." "It is important, but Emma's your daughter. She called for a reason." Sarah closed her journal, running her fingers over the worn leather cover. Michael had given it to her the year they got married, had inscribed the first page with words she still couldn't read without tears. "For charting the unknown, both above and within. Love, Em." "Michael would have wanted you to answer," Marcus said, reading her thoughts the way old friends do. "Michael would have been here with us, staring at that data, and forgetting the rest of the world existed," Sarah replied. "That was always our problem. We were better at understanding the universe than understanding each other. Maybe, but he learned toward the end. He tried to tell you that before he died." Sarah remembered. The hospital room, the machines measuring Michael's failing heart, his hand in hers. "Make time for what matters," he'd whispered. I spent my life studying time, and I never had enough of it for us, she'd promised. She'd failed. The team dispersed to rest, to shower, to eat something that wasn't vending machine food. Sarah remained, unable to leave the data room, unable to stop staring at the image on the screen. The structure in Sector 719 gazed back at her across billions of years of cosmic expansion, across a gulf that should have made communication impossible, across space-time itself. Her thoughts drifted to her mentor, Dr. Harold Kepler. He'd retired 10 years ago, moved to a small cabin in Oregon, where he claimed to have finally found peace. Harold had taught her everything about observational astronomy, about patience and precision, and the humility required to study something as vast as the universe. He used to tell her that the cosmos didn't care about human understanding, that it existed in ways we might never comprehend, and that accepting that limitation was the first step toward wisdom. She picked up her phone and dialed his number. It rang 4 times before his familiar gravelly voice answered. Sarah Chen, it's 6 in the morning. Someone better be dead or you've found aliens. Despite everything, she smiled. I'm not sure what we've found, Harold. That's why I'm calling. His tone shifted immediately, the old sharpness returning. Tell me. She described the discovery, the light reversal phenomenon, the structures, the signal. She heard him breathing on the other end, processing, thinking in that careful way she'd learned to emulate. Don't tell anyone else, he said finally. Not yet. Not until you understand what you're dealing with. That's the plan. But Harold, if this is real, we can't keep it quiet forever. This is too important. Important, he repeated, the word heavy with meaning she couldn't quite parse. Yes, it's important. That's exactly why you need to be careful. Sarah, in 40 years of observation, I saw things that didn't make the journals. Things that got quietly filed away because they raised questions we weren't ready to answer. What kind of things? The kind that made me retire early. The kind that made me realize some discoveries change everything, and not always for the better. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll think about what you're doing before you tell the world. His intensity unnerved her. Harold had always been the voice of bold inquiry, of pushing boundaries. This caution felt wrong, felt like fear, and Harold Kepler didn't fear anything. I promise, she said, but we need to understand this. We need to know what it is. I know. Just remember that understanding comes with responsibility. The universe keeps its secrets for reasons we might not appreciate until it's too late. They talked for another 20 minutes. Harold asking detailed questions about the data, about the signal patterns, about the exact coordinates and specifications. When they finally hung up, Sarah felt more unsettled than before. What had Harold seen that had driven him to retirement? What discoveries had been filed away and by whom? The day shift arrived at 8, bringing with them the mundane concerns of equipment maintenance and scheduled observations. Sarah briefed them minimally, claiming they'd detected an unusual signal that required further analysis. She authorized a hold on all other projects, redirecting the full capacity of their systems towards Sector 719. Some grumbled, but her authority was absolute in these matters. By noon, they'd processed enough data to confirm beyond any doubt that the phenomenon was real and not an artifact of their instruments or analysis. The light reversal extended across a region roughly 3 million light-years in diameter. The structures within showed no signs of natural formation. They were too regular, too complex, too purposeful, and the signal grew stronger with each passing hour, as if responding to their observation. As if aware it was being watched, Eleanor discovered the most disturbing detail while analyzing the signal's frequency patterns. It's modulating, she said, pulling up a spectrographic display. The signal isn't static. It's changing, adapting, almost like it's trying to establish communication protocols. That's impossible, Thomas said. We're seeing light from 13.8 billion years ago. This is ancient history, frozen photons from the universe's infancy. Nothing can respond in real time across that distance. Unless, Sarah said slowly, the light reversal means time is also moving differently there. If time runs backwards in that region, then cause and effect might be inverted. Our observation of the signal might, from that region's perspective, come before the signal was sent. The team stared at her. Marcus rubbed his temples. You're suggesting temporal inversion on a cosmic scale. Sarah, that's science fiction. So are structures at the edge of the universe that shouldn't exist. So is light moving backward. We're already past the boundary of what we thought was possible. We need to consider every option, no matter how unlikely. Her phone buzzed again. Emma. Sarah glanced at it, started to dismiss the call, then something made her hesitate. Marcus's words echoed in her mind. Michael's dying wish. The growing certainty that she stood at a crossroads, not just in her career but in her life. She excused herself and stepped into the hallway, answering the call. Emma, I'm sorry I haven't called back. Her daughter's voice came through, tight with emotion Sarah couldn't immediately identify. Mom, I need to talk to you in person. Can you come to Albuquerque today? Sweetheart, I'm in the middle of something important. A major discovery. Can it wait until this weekend? Silence on the line, long enough that Sarah thought Emma had hung up. Then quietly, no, Mom, it can't wait. I'm pregnant. 3 months. And I wanted you to be the first to know, but I can see that's still too much to ask. Sarah's world tilted. A grandchild. New life. New beginnings. All the things she'd missed with Emma because she'd been too busy charting dead stars and ancient light. The pattern repeating, the mistakes compounding across generations. Emma, I'm so sorry. I'll come today. I'll leave right now. Don't bother if it's an obligation. I'm not calling to make you feel guilty. I'm calling because despite everything, I wanted to share this with you. But I can see you haven't changed. The stars will always matter more than I do. That's not true. Emma, please, give me 2 hours. I'll be there. Another pause. Fine, 2 hours. But if you're late, if you call with an excuse, I'm done. I mean it, Mom. I'm done trying. The call ended. Sarah stood in the hallway, phone in her hand, torn between 2 impossible choices. In the data room, humanity's greatest discovery awaited, mysteries that could reshape everything. In Albuquerque, her daughter carried new life, offered one more chance at the relationship Sarah had spent years destroying through neglect. She looked at her reflection in the dark window, seeing not herself but her mother, who had also chosen career over family, who had also justified absence with importance. The pattern stretched back generations, women trying to prove themselves in a world that demanded they sacrifice one dream for another. Not this time, Sarah said to her reflection. She walked back into the data room, where her team huddled around monitors, displaying impossible images from the edge of existence. Marcus, you're in charge. Document everything. Run every test. I need to go see my daughter. I'll be back tomorrow morning. Marcus looked at her with something like pride. Take all the time you need. We'll hold down the fort. Sarah gathered her journal, her keys, her jacket. As she left the observatory, she looked back once at the data room, at the screen showing that inexplicable structure billions of light years away. It would still be there tomorrow. Emma might not be. Sarah drove through the desert toward Albuquerque with the radio off, her mind split between the road ahead and the discovery she'd left behind. The afternoon sun beat down on the asphalt, creating mirages that shimmered and dissolved, illusions that reminded her uncomfortably of what they'd observed in Sector 719. What if it was all illusion? What if exhaustion and wishful thinking had conjured impossibilities from noise? But she knew better. The data was real. The signal was real. Whatever existed at the edge of the observable universe was reaching across space and time to touch humanity, and she had no idea whether that touch would be gentle or catastrophic. Her meeting with Emma lasted 3 hours. They sat in a small cafe near Emma's apartment, awkward at first, then gradually warming to each other through the shared excitement of impending motherhood. Emma showed her ultrasound pictures, talked about names and nursery colors, and all the small important details that Sarah had never made time for when Emma was young. I'm scared, Mom, Emma admitted, her hand resting on her still flat belly. I don't know how to be a parent. I didn't exactly have the best example. The words stung because they were true. Sarah reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. I was a terrible mother. I chose my work over you, over your father, over everything that should have mattered. But you're not me, Emma. You're better than I ever was. You'll be wonderful. Will you be here? Really here, I mean. Not just showing up for the big moments, but actually present for the small ones that matter more. Sarah wanted to promise. She wanted to swear she'd changed, that discovering her daughter was pregnant had somehow transformed her into someone capable of putting family first. But she'd made that promise before, to Michael, to Emma herself. Words were easy. Action was what counted. I'll try, she said honestly. I'll fail sometimes, but I'll keep trying. And when you need me, really need me, I'll be there. That's a promise I can keep. Emma squeezed her hand. That's all I'm asking. They parted with an embrace that felt like a beginning, like a door opening after years of being locked. Sarah drove back to the observatory as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple that reminded her why she'd fallen in love with the sky in the first place. The universe was beautiful, terrible, vast, beyond comprehension, and it was the only home humanity would ever know. She arrived at the observatory near midnight to find it blazing with lights, every window illuminated, every system running at maximum capacity. Something had changed in the hours she'd been gone. She could feel it in the air, in the urgency of the night shift personnel rushing between buildings. Marcus met her at the entrance, his face haggard. Thank God you're back. It's accelerating. What is? All of it. The signal's getting stronger. The light reversal is intensifying. And Sarah, we found something in the signal. Patterns that match human speech frequencies. It's trying to communicate with us, and we think it's succeeding. They hurried to the data room, where the entire team had gathered despite the late hour. The main screen showed a waveform analysis of the signal, peaks and valleys, that pulsed with an almost organic rhythm. Overlaid on the waveform were phonetic markers, sounds that human vocal cords could produce. We ran it through every linguistic database we have access to, James explained, his words tumbling over each other in excitement. The signal contains fragments of multiple languages, English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, dozens of others. But they're scrambled, like someone's trying to learn our languages in real time by sampling our broadcasts. That's impossible, Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. Everything about this was impossible. We thought so too, Elena added. But then we isolated specific phrases. Sarah, they're not random. They're coherent. They're trying to tell us something. Thomas pulled up a text file on a secondary screen. It contained perhaps 24 phrases, each marked with a confidence level indicating how certain the linguistic analysis was of the translation. Sarah scanned the list, her blood cooling with each line. We see you. Why do you look? Turn back. Not meant for eyes. The pattern breaks. Time flows wrong. You will understand too late. The phrases read like warnings, like someone or something attempting to communicate danger across an impossible gulf. But the implications were staggering. If this signal was coming from 13.8 billion light-years away, it represented light from the universe's infancy, from a time when stars were just beginning to form. Nothing should have existed then that could create such messages, let alone understand human language. We need to contact the NSF, Marcus said, referring to the National Science Foundation, their primary funding source. This is beyond us now. This needs international cooperation, peer review, validation from multiple sources. Not yet, Sarah said, surprising herself with the vehemence of her response. Harold's warning echoed in her mind. We don't understand what we're dealing with. If we go public with this, if we tell the world that we've found what appears to be intelligent communication from the edge of space, we'll trigger panic, religious upheaval, social chaos. We need to be absolutely certain before we open that door. We are certain, James argued. Look at the data. Look at those messages. This isn't equipment error or pareidolia. This is real contact with something beyond Earth, beyond anything we've imagined. Is it? Sarah pulled up the spectroscopic data, pointing to anomalies she'd noticed earlier but hadn't fully processed. The light reversal suggests temporal inversion. What if we're not receiving a message from the past, but from the future? What if those structures aren't at the edge of space, but at the edge of time? The room fell silent as her team grappled with the implications. If she was right, then everything they thought they understood about the signal needed to be reinterpreted. Messages from the future would explain how it could respond to their observation, how it could know human languages that hadn't existed 13 billion years ago. "That's insane," Thomas said quietly. "Time doesn't work that way. We don't know how time works at the edge of the universe," Sarah countered. "We've never been able to observe the boundary where space-time began. What if that boundary is malleable? What if causality breaks down there?" Before anyone could respond, the observatory's main alarm system activated. Red lights flashed in the hallways. A recorded voice announced, "Security protocol initiated. All personnel report to main conference room immediately." Sarah exchanged glances with Marcus. They'd never activated security protocols in the 20 years she'd worked here. The Deep Space Observatory was a scientific facility, not a military installation. They had fire alarms and emergency evacuation procedures, but nothing that would trigger a security lockdown. They found their answer in the conference room. A woman in a dark suit stood at the head of the table, flanked by two men who carried themselves with military bearing despite wearing civilian clothes. The woman was perhaps 45, with steel-grey eyes that assessed each person as they entered. "I'm Agent Victoria Marsh, National Security Agency," she said without preamble. "As of 6 hours ago, your facility and its findings have been classified under National Security Directive 77 Alpha. You are hereby prohibited from discussing your recent observations with anyone outside this room, including family members, colleagues at other institutions, or media contacts. Violation of this directive carries a minimum sentence of 20 years in federal prison." Sarah felt the world shift beneath her feet. "You can't do this. Scientific discovery doesn't belong to the government. We have an obligation to share our findings with the global community. You have an obligation to follow the law, Dr. Chen. Your facility receives federal funding. Your observations use government resources. That makes your discovery subject to national security review. And this discovery has been deemed a potential threat to public safety and social stability." "On what grounds?" Marcus demanded. Agent Marsh pulled up the same message list they'd been analyzing moments before, projected on the conference room screen. "These messages suggest contact with a non-human intelligence. The psychological, social, and political ramifications of confirming such contact are incalculable. Until we understand what we're dealing with, this information stays classified." "You've been monitoring our communications," Sarah said, understanding dawning. "Our systems are compromised." "Your systems are secured," Marsh corrected. "There's a difference. The NSA maintains surveillance on all facilities, conducting deep space observations. We've had protocols in place for decades for exactly this scenario. You're not the first to detect anomalous signals, Dr. Chen, but you are the first to detect one this coherent, this clearly intentional." Sarah's mind reeled. Other signals, other discoveries that had been classified and buried. Harold's cryptic warning suddenly made horrifying sense. How many times had humanity glimpsed something beyond the veil, only to have it hidden away by frightened bureaucrats? "You can't suppress this forever," she said. "Other observatories will eventually scan the same sector. They'll see what we've seen, perhaps, but they won't have your detailed analysis, your signal decryption, your understanding of the implications. Knowledge is power, Dr. Chen, and we're not letting that power slip into the wrong hands until we know how to wield it safely." The observatory transformed overnight into something between a research facility and a prison. NSA technicians installed new equipment in the data room, black boxes that monitored every keystroke, every transmission, every piece of information flowing through their systems. Armed guards appeared at the perimeter, polite but unmovable. The team was allowed to continue their work, but under constant supervision, their every discovery immediately classified. Sarah threw herself into the analysis with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford. Food an afterthought consumed mechanically while staring at data streams. The signal from Sector 719 grew stronger each day, the messages more coherent, more urgent. It was as if whatever existed at the edge of space and time was shouting across the void, desperate to be heard before something happened, before some threshold was crossed. They brought in specialists. Dr. Yuki Tanaka arrived from MIT 3 days after the lockdown. A xenoarchaeologist who'd spent 20 years developing theoretical frameworks for understanding non-human intelligence. She was in her early 50s, with sharp features and sharper intellect, and she brought a perspective that Sarah's team desperately needed. "The structures you've imaged don't match any known natural formation," Yuki said during their first briefing. "But they also don't match human engineering principles. They're too organic, too fluid. They suggest a different approach to construction, to existence itself. If these are artifacts of intelligence, that intelligence thinks in ways fundamentally alien to us." "What about the messages?" Sarah asked. "They're in human languages. That suggests some understanding of our thinking, or it suggests perfect mimicry without comprehension," Yuki countered. "Parrots can reproduce human speech without understanding meaning. These messages might be the equivalent of someone shouting random words they've heard, hoping that quantity will substitute for coherence." But the messages weren't random. Sarah had spent weeks analyzing their structure, their sequence, their relationship to observable changes in the signal frequency. They formed a pattern, a narrative of sorts, though one that remained frustratingly incomplete. She'd compiled them in order of reception, creating a document that read like a fragmented warning from beyond. "First contact protocols," Yuki continued, "assume communication with beings who evolved in similar conditions to humans. Carbon-based, existing in compatible temperature ranges, perceiving similar electromagnetic spectra. But if these entities exist at the edge of space-time, where physical laws might differ fundamentally, how do we even begin to establish mutual understanding?" "We're assuming they want mutual understanding," Marcus said. "What if the messages are warnings? What if they're telling us to stop looking because our observation itself is dangerous?" Sarah had considered this. One phrase kept recurring in the signal: "the pattern breaks." She'd initially interpreted it as a reference to some disruption in the structures they observed. But what if it meant something more personal, more immediate? What if humanity's observation of the anomaly was itself the pattern-breaking event? The night shift brought a breakthrough that made this question urgent. Thomas burst into Sarah's office near 3 a.m, tablet in hand, face flushed with discovery or fear, or both. "The signal's changed," he said without preamble. "It's no longer fragmentary. We're receiving complete sentences, grammatically correct, semantically coherent. Sarah, it's speaking directly to us now." They gathered in the data room, the night team and the NSA handlers and Agent Marsh herself, all staring at the main screen where text scrolled in real time, appearing as the linguistic analysis software processed the incoming signal. "You have seen what was hidden. The boundary thins. Time flows both ways at the edge. We exist in your future, speaking to your past. Our warnings echo backward. Stop looking. Stop observing. Each photon you capture draws us closer to you, draws you closer to us. The pattern breaks when observation becomes interaction. You cannot unsee what you have seen." The cascade begins, the room filled with voices, questions, arguments, theories. But Sarah stood silent, cold dread settling in her chest. The message was clear. Observation itself was the danger. By studying the anomaly, by capturing and analyzing light from that impossible region, they were somehow interacting with it, changing it, or perhaps being changed by it. "We need to shut down the observations," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Immediately. Stop all data collection from Sector 719. Agent Marsh shook her head. "We've barely scratched the surface of understanding this phenomenon. Stopping now would be premature." "It's telling us to stop," Sarah insisted. Whatever we're dealing with, it's trying to warn us that continued observation is dangerous. We need to listen. Or it's trying to prevent us from discovering something it once kept secret, Marsh countered. These could be scare tactics, Dr. Chen, disinformation designed to keep us blind. To what end? If this is truly from our future, if it represents some version of humanity trying to communicate backward through time, why would they warn us away unless the danger was real? Yuki spoke up, her voice thoughtful. There's another possibility. What if the warning itself is the danger? What if by telling us not to look, they ensure that we do look? A temporal paradox, where the warning creates the observation that creates the cascade they're trying to prevent. Sarah felt a headache building behind her eyes, the kind that came from too little sleep and too much impossibility. The logic of time travel, if that's what they were dealing with, made her brain hurt, cause and effect tangled into loops that chased their own tails. We need more data, Marcus said, not less. We need to understand the mechanism of this communication. How is a signal traveling backward through time? What technology or physics allows that? Over the following weeks, they discovered partial answers. The light reversal phenomenon wasn't truly reversing the direction of photons. Instead, it appeared to be creating a region where entropy decreased rather than increased, where time's arrow pointed in the opposite direction. In that region, events happened in reverse sequence from our perspective. A message sent from our future would appear to be received in our past. But the mechanism that created this temporal inversion remained mysterious. The structures they observed seemed to be generating some kind of field that warped space-time itself, creating a bubble where different physical laws applied. Yuki called it a temporal mirror, a boundary where past and future met and exchanged information. If we could replicate this technology, she said during one of their analysis sessions, we could communicate with our own future or past. We could prevent disasters before they happened, warn ourselves about catastrophes, change the course of history, or create paradoxes that unravel causality, Sarah said. There's a reason the universe doesn't normally allow this kind of communication. Knowing the future changes the future. That's the cascade they're warning about. Her personal life deteriorated in parallel with her growing obsession. Emma called daily at first, then weekly, then stopped calling altogether. Sarah missed the calls, forgot to return messages, justified her absence with the magnitude of what she was discovering. The pattern repeated, the same mistakes her mother had made, the same choices that destroyed relationships in favor of knowledge. Marcus confronted her one evening as she worked alone in the data room, well past midnight. You're doing it again, choosing the work over everything else. This is bigger than personal relationships, Sarah said, not looking up from her screens. We're talking about communication across time, about warnings from our own descendants. How can I ignore that? The same way you ignored Emma's pregnancy? The same way you ignored Michael when he was dying? Sarah, there will always be another discovery, another mystery. But there's only one daughter, only one chance to be part of her life. You don't understand. The messages are getting more specific. They're trying to tell us something about a choice we have to make, something that determines whether humanity survives or falls into some kind of cascade failure. I can't walk away from that responsibility. What about your responsibility to Emma, to yourself? You look like hell, Sarah. When's the last time you slept more than 3 hours? When's the last time you ate a real meal? She couldn't remember. The days blurred together, marked only by new messages from the signal, new patterns in the data. She lost weight, developed a tremor in her hands, noticed her reflection looking increasingly haggard in the bathroom mirror. But none of that mattered compared to what she was learning. The junior researcher who'd had the breakdown in the early days hadn't returned to work. Sarah heard through Elena that he'd checked himself into psychiatric care, unable to cope with the implications of what they'd discovered. Others on the team showed signs of strain, the psychological weight of knowing that humanity might not be alone, that the universe contained intelligences beyond comprehension, that time itself might be malleable. Sarah found herself experiencing moments of dissociation, standing in front of the monitors without remembering how she'd gotten there, losing minutes or hours to fugue states where her mind simply couldn't process any more information. The human brain wasn't designed to contemplate cosmic horror on this scale, wasn't built to maintain sanity while staring into temporal abysses. Agent Marsh brought in military psychologists to monitor the team's mental health, but Sarah refused to speak with them. She couldn't afford the time, couldn't risk being pulled from the project because some government shrink decided she was cracking under pressure. She was fine. She had to be fine. Too much depended on her maintaining focus. The messages continued their progression toward greater clarity and greater urgency. One phrase appeared repeatedly: Marcus Webb will understand first. Sarah had no idea what it meant. Marcus showed no signs of special insight into the phenomenon. He worked alongside her, analyzing the same data, reaching similar conclusions. What would he understand that she wouldn't? 3 months into the lockdown, the observatory had become a pressure cooker of classified information and growing paranoia. The NSA had expanded its presence, bringing in more agents, more equipment, more restrictions. The team wasn't allowed to leave the facility without escort. Their personal communications were monitored. They lived and worked in a bubble of secrecy that grew more suffocating each day. Yuki made the next breakthrough, though breakthrough felt like the wrong word for a discovery that only deepened the mystery. She'd been analyzing the geometric patterns of the structures, using advanced mathematical models to understand their topology. These aren't buildings or ships or anything we'd traditionally call technology, she explained to the assembled team. They're more like mathematical constructs made physical. Imagine if you could take an equation and give it mass, give it presence in space-time. That's what these structures appear to be. They're information given form. What kind of information? Sarah asked. Instructions, I think. Or perhaps a program. They're too complex for me to fully decode, but I'm seeing patterns that resemble computational processes, as if the structures themselves are performing calculations, running simulations. And the calculations seem to involve us, our timeline, our choices. The implications made Sarah's head spin. If the structures were simulating human history, if they were running models of possible futures, then the warnings they sent might be based on computational predictions rather than actual experience. The future humans trying to contact them might not be real people, but simulated entities, artificial consciousness created by mathematics given physical form. How do we know we're not simulated? James asked quietly, voicing the question they'd all been avoiding. If they can simulate timelines, if they can model human consciousness with that level of detail, how do we know we're the original and not just another iteration in their calculations? No one had a good answer. The philosophical rabbit hole went deep, threatening to undermine any certainty about reality itself. Sarah pushed the question aside, focusing instead on practical matters. Whether they were original or simulation didn't change the fact that they existed, that they experienced reality, that they had to make choices based on available information. Emma gave birth to a daughter on a Tuesday in April. Sarah learned about it from Marcus, who'd been contacted by Emma's partner when they couldn't reach Sarah directly. She'd silenced her phone days earlier, unable to cope with the distraction of personal matters while trying to decode messages from the edge of time. You need to go see her, Marcus said. Now today, this isn't negotiable, Sarah. I can't leave. We're on the verge of understanding the cascade mechanism. The latest messages suggest there's a specific decision point, a moment where human choice determines the entire future timeline. I have to find out what that moment is. You're living that moment right now, Marcus said, his voice hard. Every time you choose this work over your family, you're making the decision that leads to the cascade. Can't you see that? The future they're warning about is the one where people like you prioritize knowledge over connection, understanding over love, discovery over life itself. His words hit her like physical blows, each one landing in the hollow space where her certainty used to be. Was he right? Was the cascade not some cosmic catastrophe, but a human one, a civilization-wide choice to value information over relationship, to study existence rather than experience it? She left the observatory that evening, driving through a spring rainstorm toward Albuquerque and the hospital where her daughter had just brought new life into an uncertain world. The windshield wipers beat a rhythm that matched her heart, steady and relentless. The road stretched ahead, wet asphalt reflecting the glow of passing headlights, each one a small sun in the darkness. Sarah held her granddaughter for the first time at 2 a.m, the hospital quiet, except for the soft beeping of monitors and the distant sound of newborns crying. The baby was impossibly small, impossibly perfect, her tiny fingers curling around Sarah's thumb with a grip that felt like forgiveness. Emma watched from the hospital bed, exhausted but radiant. Her name is Grace, Grace Michelle, after Dad. Tears came then, the kind Sarah hadn't allowed herself in years. For Michael, who would never meet his granddaughter. For Emma, who'd grown up with a mother more interested in distant stars than her daughter's daily life. For herself, for all the time she'd wasted chasing answers to questions that suddenly seemed less important than the small, warm weight in her arms. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered, though she didn't know if she was apologizing to Emma, to Grace, or to the ghost of the man she'd loved and failed. "I'm so sorry for all of it." Emma's hand found hers. "You're here now. That's what matters." Sarah stayed for 3 days, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair beside Emma's bed, changing diapers, learning to swaddle, relearning how to be present for someone other than herself. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from the observatory, but she ignored them. The universe could wait. Her family couldn't. On the 3rd day, Marcus drove down to collect her. They sat in the hospital cafeteria, drinking terrible coffee, while Sarah tried to explain what she'd realized during her time away from the data. "The messages keep saying the pattern breaks," she said. "I thought it meant some cosmic pattern, some physical law that got disrupted. But what if it's simpler than that? What if it means the pattern of human connection, of prioritizing each other over everything else? What if the cascade isn't a physical catastrophe, but a social one? A world where everyone becomes like me, isolated in their obsessions, brilliant but alone." Marcus considered this. "You think the future humans are warning us about losing our humanity in the pursuit of knowledge? I think they're warning us that knowledge without wisdom is dangerous, that understanding the universe matters less than understanding each other. That's what Michael tried to tell me before he died. That's what Emma's been trying to tell me for years. And I was too blind to see it. So what do? Stop studying the anomaly? Pretend we didn't see it? No, we study it. But we remember why we study it. To improve human life, to expand our capacity for wonder, to give future generations a better understanding of their place in the cosmos. Not to feed our egos or prove our brilliance. The work serves humanity. Humanity doesn't serve the work. They drove back to the observatory in companionable silence, the desert landscape rolling past in shades of brown and gold. Sarah felt different, lighter somehow, as if putting down a burden she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. The mysteries of Sector 719 remained, but they no longer consumed her. They were problems to solve, not obsessions to die for. The observatory buzzed with new activity when they arrived. Yuki had made another breakthrough, this one more disturbing than any previous discovery. She waited in the conference room with Agent Marsh and several military personnel Sarah didn't recognize. "The structures are moving," Yuki said without preamble. "Not through space, but through time. They're getting closer to our present moment, advancing along the temporal axis at an accelerating rate. If the progression continues, they'll reach our time frame in approximately 8 months. Sarah absorbed this information, her mind automatically calculating implications. What happens when they reach us? We don't know. But the messages have become increasingly urgent. The latest one came through this morning while you were with Emma. Yuki pulled up a text file on the conference screen. It's different from the others. More personal, more specific. The message read, "Dr. Sarah Chen, your granddaughter will live to see the cascade or the recovery. The choice is yours. The observation is not the danger. The suppression is. Humanity must know. Humanity must choose. The pattern breaks when truth is hidden. The pattern heals when truth is shared. Sarah stared at the screen, feeling the weight of those words settling into her bones. They knew her name. They knew about Grace. The temporal connection wasn't abstract anymore. It was personal, immediate, undeniable. This changes everything, Marcus said. They're not warning us away from observation. They're warning us about suppression, about keeping this secret. Agent Marsh stood abruptly. This could be manipulation, a trick to get you to go public with classified information. Or it could be the truth, Sarah countered. You said other facilities had detected anomalous signals in the past. What happened to those discoveries? Where are they now? Marsh's silence was answer enough. Sarah felt anger rising, righteous and clarifying. You buried them. Every time someone found evidence of something beyond our understanding, you classified it and locked it away. And by doing that, you ensured humanity kept walking blind into whatever future awaits us. We protected social stability, Marsh said. You have no idea what would happen if the general population learned that we're not alone, that time travel might be possible, that everything they believe about reality could be wrong. The panic, the religious upheaval, the collapse of institutional authority. Better that than the cascade, Sarah said. Better that humanity faces truth, however difficult, than lives in comfortable ignorance until it's too late to change course. Over the following weeks, Sarah dug into the history of suppressed discoveries. She called Harold, who finally admitted that he'd detected similar anomalies in the 1980s. The NSA had classified his findings, threatened him into silence, eventually pushed him into early retirement when he persisted in trying to publish. They have protocols, Harold told her over an encrypted line. Protocols for dealing with discoveries that threaten the established order. I wasn't the first, Sarah, and you won't be the last. They've been doing this since the 1940s, maybe longer. What did you find? What made them scared enough to bury your work? A signal from the Andromeda Galaxy. It contained mathematical proofs that shouldn't exist yet. Solutions to problems we haven't even formulated. I realized what you're realizing now. We weren't receiving messages from aliens. We were receiving messages from ourselves, from future humans who'd solved those problems and were trying to accelerate our development. Why didn't you fight harder to publish? Harold's laugh was bitter. I had a wife, 3 kids, a career I'd spent my life building. They made it clear that if I persisted, I'd lose everything. So I made the choice that millions of humans make every day. I chose personal security over truth. I've regretted it every day since. Sarah understood that choice viscerally now. The pressure to conform, to accept the official narrative, to prioritize stability over revelation. But she also understood that the pattern they'd been warned about depended on people making that choice repeatedly across generations. Each individual decision seeming small but collectively creating a cascade toward ignorance. The team discovered more evidence of the suppression pattern. Old research papers with sections redacted. Scientists who'd made promising discoveries and then abruptly changed fields. Facilities that had reported anomalous readings and then gone silent. A paper trail of controlled information stretching back decades. It's not a conspiracy, Yuki said during one of their late-night analysis sessions. It's worse than that. It's a system, a self-sustaining mechanism for preserving ignorance. No one person controls it. It just perpetuates itself through institutional inertia and individual fear. Marcus made a discovery that turned Sarah's blood cold. He'd been analyzing the messages they'd received, looking for patterns in the content and timing. The warnings about the cascade correlate with moments in human history when major discoveries were suppressed, he said, showing her a timeline he'd constructed. Every time we've hidden truth from the public, the messages from the future become more urgent, more desperate. It's as if each suppression reinforces the pattern, makes the cascade more likely. So the cascade isn't a single catastrophic event, Sarah said slowly. It's cumulative. Every hidden truth, every buried discovery, every person silenced for knowing too much. They all add up over time until humanity reaches a tipping point where we can't recover. And we're approaching that tipping point now. The structure's moving through time, getting closer to our present. That's not an invasion. It's a representation of how close we are to the cascade moment. The point where suppression becomes so total that humanity loses the capacity for truth entirely. Emma visited with Grace, bringing life and normalcy to the suffocating atmosphere of the locked-down facility. Agent Marsh initially tried to prevent the visit, but Sarah threatened to quit, to walk away from the entire project, and Marsh finally relented. They met in Sarah's small residential quarters, Emma nursing Grace, while Sarah tried to explain the impossible situation she found herself in. So you've found proof that time travel exists, that future humans are trying to warn us, and the government wants to hide it, Emma summarized. And you have to decide whether to obey orders or go public. It's more complicated than that. No, Mom, it's really not. You spent my entire childhood choosing your work over me, over us. And you're about to make the same choice again, except this time you'll frame it as duty or responsibility or protecting me from consequences. But it's still choosing the safe path over the right one. Sarah had no answer for her daughter's accusation because it was true. Fear motivated her now. Fear of consequences, fear of upending her life, fear of the responsibility that came with possessing world-changing knowledge. Staying silent was easier. Following orders was safer, and she was so tired of fighting. But Grace, sleeping peacefully in Emma's arms, represented the future those warnings spoke about. A future that depended on choices made now, in this moment, by people like Sarah who stood at the intersection of knowledge and power. The signal intensified dramatically over the next month. The messages became a constant stream, dozens per day, each one building on the previous, creating a narrative that was impossible to ignore. They described the cascade in detail now, painting a picture of a future where humanity's capacity for truth deteriorated gradually over generations, where convenient lies replaced uncomfortable facts, where institutional control of information became so complete that independent thought itself became impossible. You are living in the seed time, one message read. The choices you make now echo forward through centuries. Every truth suppressed is a brick in the wall that will eventually seal humanity in darkness. Every truth revealed is a crack in that wall, a place where light can enter. The pattern breaks or heals based on what you do next. Yuki developed a theory about the mechanism of temporal communication that made the situation even more urgent. The structures aren't just sending messages backward, she explained. They're creating a bridge between our time and theirs. As they move closer along the temporal axis, that bridge strengthens. Eventually it will become permanent. Our present will be locked in temporal connection with their future. What does that mean practically? Sarah asked. It means our choices will be immediately visible to them, and their choices will be immediately visible to us. Time will become transparent, causality will become bidirectional. We'll be able to see the consequences of our actions before we take them. That sounds like it would make moral decision-making easier. Or impossible. Imagine trying to choose when you can see all possible futures simultaneously. Imagine trying to maintain free will when you know what you're going to choose before you choose it. That's the cascade, not the end of humanity, but the end of meaningful human agency. The philosophical implications paralyzed Sarah for days. She'd spent her career believing that more knowledge was always better, that understanding the universe in greater detail was inherently good. But what if there was some knowledge that corrupted the knower? What if seeing too much, understanding too completely, destroyed the very thing that made humans human? Marcus found her in the observation deck one evening, staring out at the star-filled sky the way she had on the night this all began. How long ago that seemed now, though barely 6 months had passed. She felt like a different person. shaped by revelation and responsibility into something she barely recognized. "The team's splitting," Marcus said. "Half want to follow your lead, whatever you decide. The other half think we should obey the classification, keep this quiet until we understand it better. What do you think?" "I think the messages said I would understand first, and I'm starting to. This isn't about the science, Sarah. It's about the people. It's always been about the people. The future humans trying to contact us, they're not concerned about temporal physics or causality loops. They're concerned about connection, about humanity maintaining the capacity to share truth with each other. That's what's at stake. So we go public? We prepare to. We document everything. We create backups they can't destroy. And when the time is right, we release it all. Not to the government, not to select institutions, but to everyone. Let humanity make the choice collectively, instead of having it made for them by bureaucrats who think they know better." Sarah looked at him. This man who'd been her colleague and friend for 2 decades, who'd stood beside her through discoveries and disappointments, who understood her better than she sometimes understood herself. "They'll destroy us. Our careers, our reputations, possibly our freedom, probably. But Grace will grow up in a world where truth matters more than convenience, where people have the information they need to make real choices about their future. Isn't that worth something?" It was worth everything. Sarah knew that with a certainty that felt like bedrock, like the fundamental laws of physics she'd studied her entire career. Some things were absolute, not in the scientific sense, but in the moral sense. Truth was one of them. The right of people to know what was real was another. The next message from the future confirmed her decision. It came through with unusual clarity, as if the temporal bridge had strengthened enough to carry more detailed information. The choice point approaches. In 43 days, you will have an opportunity to transmit your findings globally. The infrastructure exists. The preparation time is sufficient. If you choose revelation, the timeline shifts toward recovery. If you choose suppression, the cascade becomes inevitable. There is no middle path. Choose. 43 days. Sarah marked the date on her calendar with a heavy black circle. 6 weeks to prepare for a decision that would define not just her life, but potentially the trajectory of human civilization. The weight of it threatened to crush her, but she found strength in small moments. Grace's first smile, Emma's forgiveness, the loyalty of her team as they worked in secret to prepare their data for release. Yuki made the breakthrough on a Tuesday evening in late summer. She'd been working on decoding the mathematical structures embedded in the signal, trying to understand the mechanism that allowed information to flow backward through time. Her shout of triumph brought the entire team running to her office. "I've found it," she said, her hands shaking as she pulled up equations on her screen. "The proof, the temporal echo device. It's not alien technology. It's ours." Sarah stared at the screen, her brain struggling to process what she was seeing. Quantum field equations, temporal mechanics, engineering specifications for a device that shouldn't exist yet. But the mathematics was sound, elegant, beautiful in the way that fundamental physics always was when you finally understood it correctly. "Where did this come from?" Marcus asked. "The signal. It's been there all along, embedded in the carrier wave. I thought it was noise, random fluctuations in the transmission. But it's not noise. It's compressed data, instructions for building the device that's sending us the signal. They're not just warning us. They're teaching us how to communicate with them." "A temporal echo device," Sarah said slowly, understanding dawning. "We build it, and it echoes our messages backward to this moment, creating a stable time loop where the information about building it comes from the device itself." "Exactly. It's a bootstrap paradox. The device gives us the plans for building the device. There's no original inventor, no first version. It exists in a closed causal loop. James was already pulling up fabrication specifications. We could build this. It would take months, maybe a year, but the components are all available. Quantum processors, electromagnetic containment fields, temporal stabilizers. It's advanced but not impossible." Sarah felt reality shifting again, the ground beneath her feet becoming quicksand. If they could build a device to communicate with the future, then everything they'd assumed about the signal's origin needed to be reconsidered. She pulled up the earliest messages they'd received, reading them with new understanding. "The signal isn't coming from billions of light years away," she said. "It's coming from right here, from this facility, from a device we haven't built yet, but will build using the information the future version of that device is sending us now." "How is that possible?" Delena asked. "We've been tracking this signal's origin point. It's definitely from Sector 719, at the edge of the observable universe. Because that's where the temporal mirror is," Yuki explained. "The region where time reverses. The device doesn't send signals backward through time directly. It sends them out into space toward the temporal mirror, where they reflect backward along the time axis and return to their point of origin at an earlier moment. It's like shouting into the Grand Canyon and hearing your echo, except the echo arrives before you shout." Marcus sat down heavily. "Then the structures we've been observing, the impossible architecture at the edge of space, that's all human-made. We built those." "Will build," Yuki corrected. "Centuries or millennia from now. Those structures are the device writ large, powerful enough to create a temporal bridge across cosmic spans of time. But the principle is the same as what we can build now with these plans." Sarah's mind raced through implications. If future humans had built the temporal mirror, if they'd created a mechanism for communicating with their past, then every message they'd received was a deliberate choice about what information to send backward. They weren't passively observing human history. They were actively trying to shape it. "The cascade," she said. "The warnings about the pattern breaking. They're not predictions about what might happen. They're observations about what did happen in their timeline. They've already lived through the cascade, and now they're trying to prevent it by changing their past, which is our present. But if they're trying to change the past," James said, "doesn't that mean their timeline would cease to exist? If we avoid the cascade, the future they're sending messages from won't happen. They're trying to erase themselves, unless multiple timelines exist simultaneously," Yuki suggested. "Parallel possibilities that branch from decision points. By changing our choices, they don't erase their timeline. They create a new branch where the cascade doesn't happen. Both realities coexist." Sarah thought about Grace, about the future her granddaughter would inherit. In the timeline, these messages came from what happened to Grace. Did she live through the cascade? Did she survive to see the recovery? Or did she become part of the pattern that needed breaking? That night, unable to sleep, Sarah returned to the boxes of Michael's research that she'd stored in her office. She'd avoided looking at them since his death, the pain of loss too raw, the guilt of not understanding his work while he was alive too heavy. But Yuki's discovery had triggered a memory, something Michael had said in his final days about temporal anomalies. She found his notes in the third box, handwritten pages filled with equations and observations. Michael had been a theoretical physicist specializing in quantum chronodynamics, the study of how time operated at quantum scales. His final paper, unpublished at the time of his death, proposed a mechanism for temporal echo formation in regions of extreme space-time curvature. Sarah read through his notes with growing astonishment. Michael had theorized the exact phenomenon they were now observing. He'd predicted the temporal mirror, the possibility of communication with the future, even the bootstrap paradox they were caught in. He'd submitted his paper to 3 major journals. All 3 had rejected it as too speculative, too far beyond established physics. But one reviewer's comments, attached to the rejection from Nature, caught her attention. While the mathematics is sound, publication of this work could have significant implications for causality research. Recommend rejection and notification to appropriate oversight bodies. Oversight bodies. Sarah felt cold certainty settling into her bones. Michael's work had been flagged. The NSA had been monitoring him, just as they were monitoring her now. Had they approached him, threatened him? Is that what had driven him to work so obsessively in his final years, trying to prove his theory before time ran out? She called Harold again, this time asking directly about Michael. "Did you know about his temporal research?" Harold's silence spoke volumes. "Finally, I warned him, Sarah. I told him what happened to me, what would happen to him if he persisted. But Michael believed truth was more important than safety. He believed the future of humanity depended on understanding temporal mechanics. He was right, obviously, but being right doesn't protect you from institutional power." "Did they kill him?" The question came out as a whisper, but it carried the weight of 5 years of unexamined grief and suspicion. "His heart attack was real," Harold said carefully, "but stress can kill as surely as poison. They pressured him constantly, threatened his funding, threatened you. He was trying to protect you, Sarah. That's why he never published his final work, why he never told you what he'd discovered. He knew they'd use you to control him." Sarah hung up and sat in the darkness of her office, Michael's notes spread before her, tears streaming down her face. He'd known. He'd understood the temporal bridge before they'd built it, before they'd received the first message. And he'd sacrificed his chance at recognition, possibly his life, to keep her safe from the same institutional forces that now controlled her work. The final pages of his notes contained a message, clearly written with her in mind. "Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I'm sorry for all the late nights, the obsessive work, the distance between us. I was trying to solve a problem that I now realize has no purely technical solution. The temporal bridge exists. Future humans will contact us. And when they do, the choice won't be about physics or mathematics. It will be about courage, about whether we have the strength to accept knowledge that changes everything. I trust you to make the right choice. I've always trusted you. Remember that whatever happens, you're not alone in this. The future is watching, and they're counting on you. Love, M." Sarah pressed the pages to her chest, feeling Michael's presence in the words he'd left behind. He'd known this moment would come. He'd prepared her for it the only way he could, by trusting her with the responsibility of deciding humanity's path forward. Marcus found her at dawn, still sitting in her office surrounded by Michael's research. "I've been going through the early messages," he said, "looking for mentions of Michael. Sarah, there's something you need to see." He showed her a message they'd received in the first week, one they'd dismissed as too fragmentary to be meaningful. But reading it now with full context, its meaning became clear. Michael Chen saw the path. Sarah Chen must walk it. The bridge begins with trust. Trust in the message. Trust in the choice. Trust that the future depends on present courage. "They knew Michael," Sarah said. "Not just abstractly, but personally. In their timeline, he must have succeeded in publishing his research. He must have built the first temporal echo device. And that's what triggers the cascade, not observation of the anomaly. Not the James Webb Telescope, Michael's device. Our construction of it initiates the timeline that leads to the cascade." Marcus absorbed this. "So we've been given the plans for a device that will doom humanity if we build it. That's the choice they're forcing on us. Build the device and open temporal communication, triggering the cascade, or refuse to build it and remain blind to the future, but safe." "No," Sarah said, understanding crystallizing. "That's not the choice. The choice is about what we do with the knowledge. Michael's timeline, the cascade timeline, that's what happens when the device is built in secret, controlled by governments and institutions. When temporal power becomes a tool of suppression instead of liberation. But if we reveal the plans publicly, if we let humanity collectively decide how to use this technology, then we create the branch timeline, the recovery." The suppression protocol arrived at the observatory 3 weeks before the choice point deadline. General Patricia Hawthorne delivered it personally, a severe woman in her late 50s with steel-grey hair and eyes that had seen too many classified horrors. She carried herself with military precision, but Sarah detected something else beneath the hard exterior. Weariness, perhaps, or doubt. "The decision has been made at the highest levels," Hawthorne said, her voice flat and official. "All data related to Sector 719 is to be transferred to military custody. The James Webb Telescope will be redirected to other observation targets. Your facility will be repurposed for conventional astronomical research. Every member of your team will be reassigned to separate institutions. You will sign non-disclosure agreements backed by national security law." "And if we refuse," Sarah asked, though she knew the answer, "then you'll be charged with violating federal security statutes. Prison time, minimum 20 years. Your families will be investigated for potential security breaches. Your professional reputations will be destroyed." "Dr. Chen, I understand your frustration, but this is bigger than any individual's right to knowledge. We're talking about social stability, about preventing mass panic." "We're talking about preventing human choice," Sarah countered. "About a pattern of suppression that leads directly to the cascade we've been warned about. General, have you read the messages? Do you understand what we're being told? I've read them, and I've also read similar messages from 1970s, messages that predicted catastrophe if certain discoveries were revealed. Those discoveries were suppressed. No catastrophe occurred. These warnings might be genuine, or they might be manipulation. We can't afford to gamble the stability of civilization on messages from an unknown source." Marcus stepped forward. "The source is us. Future humans trying to correct mistakes made in their past. How is that unknown? If they're truly from the future, they have the benefit of hindsight. They know how their warnings will be interpreted, how their messages will be used. For all we know, revealing this information is exactly what leads to the cascade they claim to be preventing. Temporal paradoxes make certainty impossible, Dr. Webb. We're choosing the path we know keeps civilization stable over the path that might destroy it." Sarah recognized the logic. It was the same logic that had guided institutional decision-making for generations. Choose safety over truth. Choose control over freedom. Choose the comfortable lie over the difficult reality. Each individual choice seemed reasonable. Collectively, they created the pattern that future humans were desperately trying to break. "I need to speak with General Hawthorne alone," Sarah said. The team filed out reluctantly, leaving Sarah and Hawthorne facing each other across the conference table. "You've lost someone to this pattern," Sarah said quietly. It wasn't a question. She'd seen it in Hawthorne's eyes, the personal pain beneath the professional facade. Hawthorne's mask slipped fractionally. "My daughter, brilliant astrophysicist. She detected anomalous signals in the early 2000s. She wanted to publish. The agency convinced her not to. She agreed, thinking it was the responsible choice. 3 months later, she committed suicide. Left a note saying she couldn't live with hiding truth from humanity. I'm sorry. Don't be. Be smart. Learn from her mistake. The system is bigger than any of us, Dr. Chen. It's designed to perpetuate itself, regardless of individual resistance. You can't fight it by going public. You'll just destroy yourself and accomplish nothing, unless enough people resist simultaneously. Unless the revelation is so complete, so widely distributed, that suppression becomes impossible. Sarah pulled out her tablet, showing Hawthorne the plans they'd developed. We've copied all the data to distributed servers across 40 countries. We've encoded it into multiple formats. We've prepared simultaneous releases to every major scientific institution, news organization, and university in the world. When we trigger the release, it will be impossible to suppress. Hawthorne studied the plans, her expression unreadable. This is treason. This is survival. General, in your heart, do you believe suppressing this information protects humanity? Or does it just protect the institutional power that depends on controlling information? For a long moment, Hawthorne said nothing. Then I'm going to walk out of this room and report that your facility is in compliance with the suppression protocol. I'm going to give you 72 hours before I return with federal marshals to enforce the order. What you do in those 72 hours is your choice. But understand that if you go through with this, I can't protect you from the consequences. Why are you doing this? Because my daughter was right, and because I'm tired of being part of the system that killed her. Hawthorne stood, gathering her documents. 72 hours, Dr. Chen. Make them count. The team worked around the clock for the next 3 days, preparing the most comprehensive data release in scientific history. They compiled everything, every observation of Sector 719. Every decoded message, every mathematical proof of temporal mechanics, Michael's unpublished research, Yuki's analysis of the structures, the complete plans for the temporal eco-device. They created documentation that could be understood at multiple levels. Technical papers for scientists, simplified explanations for journalists, video presentations for the general public. They translated key documents into 40 languages. They prepared press releases and scientific abstracts and philosophical discussions about the implications of temporal communication. Sarah barely slept, running on coffee and determination, and the knowledge that she was approaching a point of no return. Once they triggered the release, there would be no taking it back. Humanity would know, and knowing would change everything. Emma came to visit on the second day, bringing Grace. They sat in Sarah's small office while the baby slept peacefully, unaware that her grandmother was preparing to reshape human history. "You're really doing this," Emma said. Not a question, but an acknowledgement. "I have to. If not me, then who? If not now, then when?" The cascade depends on people making the comfortable choice, the safe choice, the choice to let someone else carry the burden of truth. I've made that choice my whole life. I chose my career over you, over your father, over everything that should have mattered. I'm not making that choice again. What will happen to you? Prison, probably. They'll charge me with everything they can think of. Theft of classified information, treason, conspiracy. I'll lose my career, my reputation, possibly my freedom. And you're okay with that? Sarah looked at Grace, sleeping peacefully, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Your father used to say that the measure of a life isn't what you accomplish, but what you make possible for others. I've accomplished a lot in my career. Papers, discoveries, recognition. None of it matters compared to making sure Grace grows up in a world where truth isn't buried whenever it becomes inconvenient. Emma reached across the desk, taking her mother's hand. I'm proud of you, Mom. For the first time in my life, I'm genuinely proud of who you're choosing to be. The words hit harder than any scientific discovery, any message from the future, any threat of imprisonment. Sarah had spent her life earning respect from colleagues, admiration from peers, recognition from institutions. But her daughter's pride, freely given after years of disappointment and distance, meant more than all of it combined. James brought concerning news on the third day. The NSA's increased surveillance on all our external communications. They're preparing to shut us down early. I don't think we have 72 hours anymore. How long? Maybe 24. 36 at most. They're mobilizing resources. This isn't going to be a quiet suppression anymore. They're treating us as a genuine threat to national security. Sarah called an emergency meeting of the core team. Marcus, Yuki, Elena, Thomas, James. The 5 people who'd been with her from the beginning, who'd seen the impossible and believed, who'd chosen to risk everything for truth. We're moving up the timeline, she said. We trigger the release tonight, midnight. That gives us 12 hours to finalize everything and 6 hours to get clear of the facility before the feds arrive. Some of us should stay, Marcus said. Create a distraction, buy time for the others to escape. I volunteer. No, Sarah said firmly. We all get clear. I'm not sacrificing anyone. We trigger the release remotely, from safe locations. Once the information is public, there's no point in the government arresting us. The damage, from their perspective, will already be done. Yuki pulled up the distribution system they'd created. We've got redundancy built into redundancy. The data will propagate through academic networks, social media, peer-to-peer file sharing, even physical media being mailed to key institutions. Within an hour of triggering the release, millions of people will have access to the full dataset. And then what? Elena asked. We've thought a lot about getting the information out, but not much about what happens after. How will people react? What will the government do? Are we prepared for the chaos this might create? No, Sarah admitted. We can't be. We're not releasing this information because we know what will happen next. We're releasing it because the alternative is worse. The pattern that leads to the cascade depends on suppression, on institutional control of transformative knowledge. We're breaking that pattern. What comes after is up to humanity collectively, not us individually. Thomas, who'd been quiet throughout the meeting, finally spoke. I've been analyzing the messages we've received over the past month. There's a pattern in their timing and content that suggests they're responding to our decision-making process. Not predicting it, but reacting to it in real time, which means the temporal bridge is already stronger than we realized. What does that mean practically? Sarah asked. It means they can see the choice we're about to make. In their present, which is our future, the timeline is shifting based on our actions now. We're not just preparing to release this information. We're actively creating the branch point that determines which future becomes real. Sarah walked to the window, overlooking the desert landscape. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. How many dawns had she watched from this observatory, charting the movement of celestial objects, measuring the expansion of the universe, trying to understand humanity's place in the cosmic order? And all along, the most important discovery wasn't out there among the stars. It was here, in the choice between hiding truth and sharing it, between control and freedom, between fear and courage. Harold called as the sun cleared the horizon. I heard through my remaining contacts that they're moving to shut you down. Sarah, are you sure about this? Once you do it, there's no going back. I'm sure. Harold, thank you for warning me all those years ago, for trying to protect me. But protection isn't what humanity needs right now. We need truth, however difficult. You sound like Michael. He was sure too, right up until the moment the stress killed him. Be careful, Sarah. Martyrdom might be noble, but it's also permanent. I'm not trying to be a martyr. I'm trying to be a scientist. We observe reality and report what we find. That's the core of what we do. Everything else is just politics and fear. She spent her final hours at the observatory in her office, writing letters to Emma and Grace. Not explanations exactly, but context. Why she'd made this choice, what she hoped would come from it. The kind of world she wanted Grace to inherit. She sealed the letters in an envelope marked to be opened on Grace's 18th birthday and gave them to Marcus for safekeeping. The team gathered in the data room at 11:30, 30 minutes before the scheduled release. They'd said their goodbyes to families, packed what few possessions they'd take with them, prepared for lives that would be forever changed by the next hour. Last chance to back out, Sarah said, though she knew none of them would. They'd come too far, understood too much, believed too deeply in what they were doing. I had a dream last night, Yuki said quietly, about my grandmother, who survived Hiroshima. She used to tell me about the moment the bomb fell, how the world changed between one heartbeat and the next. She said the worst part wasn't the destruction. It was knowing that humanity had crossed a threshold, gained a power we weren't wise enough to wield safely. I think we're at another threshold now. Not weapons this time, but knowledge. The power to see across time, to know our future, to change our past. It's terrifying. But hiding from it won't make it less real. Marcus checked his watch. 11:45. The system is ready. All nodes are active. Distribution servers are primed. We're go for release. Sarah's hand hovered over the keyboard, one keystroke away from changing everything. She thought about Michael, who'd died trying to reveal this truth. About Harold, who'd spent decades regretting his silence. About Hawthorne's daughter, who'd chosen death over living with suppressed knowledge. About Grace, sleeping peacefully in Emma's arms, unaware that her grandmother was about to give her a very different future than the one currently mapped. The latest message from the temporal bridge appeared on her screen, arriving with perfect timing. The moment is now. The choice is yours. We cannot see beyond this point. The timeline branches here. Both futures exist as possibilities. Only your courage makes one real. Thank you for choosing truth. Thank you for choosing us. The pattern heals tonight. They can't see past this moment, Sarah said, reading the message aloud. Their timeline, the cascade timeline, it ends here. Either because we succeed in creating the recovery branch, or because we fail and they cease to exist. Everything depends on this choice. Then let's make it count, Marcus said. Sarah entered the release code. The system activated, sending compressed data packets to servers across the globe. Within seconds, academic networks began receiving files. News organizations saw alerts. Social media platforms registered uploads. The information propagated like a virus, faster than any suppression effort could possibly contain. Emails went out to 10,000 scientists, journalists, philosophers, religious leaders. Each email contained the core message: humanity has made contact with our own future. This is the data. Verify it, share it. Let the world decide what comes next. The team watched as distribution metrics climbed. 1,000 downloads, 10,000, 100,000. The data spreading like light itself, impossible to recall, impossible to suppress. Within minutes, humanity's understanding of reality began to shift, person by person, mind by mind, as they opened files and saw the impossible rendered possible through mathematics and observation. "It's done," Elena said, her voice filled with awe and terror. "We actually did it." Sarah felt something release inside her chest, tension she'd been holding for months, finally letting go. They'd done it. For better or worse, they'd made the choice. The pattern was broken. Whatever came next would be different from what had come before. The first hour after the release was chaos. Sarah's phone exploded with calls, messages, emails from colleagues across the globe. Some furious at the breach of protocol, others excited by the implications. Many simply terrified of what this meant for their understanding of reality. She ignored them all, focused on monitoring the spread of information and ensuring her team reached safety. They scattered according to plan. Elena to family in Mexico, Thomas to Canada, James to a prepared safe house in rural Oregon, Yuki to contacts in Japan who'd agreed to provide protection. Marcus stayed with Sarah, both of them driving toward Albuquerque and Emma's apartment, where they planned to wait out the initial storm. The news networks picked up the story within 2 hours. At first, they treated it as a potential hoax, unverified claims from rogue scientists. But as more institutions examined the data, as telescopes around the world confirmed the observations of Sector 719, as physicists validated Michael's temporal mechanics equations, skepticism gave way to stunned acceptance. This was real. Humanity had made contact with its own future. The universe was stranger, more malleable, more filled with possibility than anyone had imagined. Sarah watched the coverage from Emma's living room, Grace sleeping in her lap, while Emma and Marcus made coffee and sandwiches that no one ate. The scale of reaction was overwhelming. Stock markets crashed globally as investors panicked about the implications. Religious leaders issued contradictory statements, some claiming this proved divine design, others declaring it evidence of humanity's hubris. Governments convened emergency sessions. The United Nations called for an international summit on temporal communication protocols. And through it all, the messages from the future continued. Now that humanity knew about the temporal bridge, the messages became more detailed, more specific. They spoke of technologies that hadn't been invented yet, scientific principles not yet discovered, historical events that would or wouldn't happen depending on choices made in the present. The future was speaking, and the entire world could hear it. Agent Marsh arrived at Emma's apartment near dawn, flanked by federal marshals. But she came not to arrest but to talk. Sarah met her at the door, prepared for handcuffs and Miranda rights. "The president wants to speak with you," Marsh said. "You've created the largest intelligence breach in American history. You've potentially destabilized global civilization. And somehow, you've also prevented the suppression timeline that every analysis now confirms would have led to catastrophic cascade failure. So I'm not under arrest. Oh, you're definitely under arrest. Multiple felony counts. But the charges are being held in abeyance, pending your cooperation with the newly formed Temporal Communication Task Force. The world needs experts who understand this phenomenon. Like it or not, Dr. Chen, you're one of the few people qualified to guide humanity through what comes next. They flew to Washington on a military transport, Sarah and Marcus both, emerging into a city transformed by knowledge. Protests filled the streets. Some demanded that the temporal bridge be destroyed, that humanity reject knowledge of its future. Others celebrated the breakthrough, calling it humanity's greatest achievement. Most people simply looked dazed, struggling to process information that rewrote everything they thought they knew about existence. The briefing room in the White House Situation Center held representatives from 30 countries, scientists from every major institution, religious leaders, philosophers, ethicists. General Hawthorne was there, no longer working to suppress, but to manage, to help humanity navigate this new reality without descending into chaos. Sarah presented the core findings, her voice steady despite exhaustion and fear and the surreal nature of briefing world leaders on time travel. She explained the temporal mirror at the edge of observable space, the structures humanity would eventually build, the messages warning about cascade failure, the choice point they'd navigated by choosing revelation over suppression. But the warnings came from a future that no longer exists, the British Prime Minister objected. If we've avoided the cascade by going public, then that timeline is erased. So how can we still be receiving messages from it? Parallel timelines, Yuki explained, joining the briefing via video link from Tokyo. Both futures exist as quantum possibilities. The cascade timeline is real in its own dimensional branch. By making a different choice, we've created a new branch, but both exist, and the temporal bridge connects them. We're receiving messages from a future that happened and a future that's happening. Reality is more complex than we thought. The president, a former physics professor who'd built his career on science policy, leaned forward with intense focus. What do the messages say about this timeline? The recovery branch we've supposedly created? Sarah pulled up the most recent transmission, received just hours earlier. They say the recovery isn't automatic or guaranteed. We've avoided the cascade, but that doesn't mean we've achieved optimal outcomes. Every choice we make from this point forward continues to shape the timeline. They're trying to help us navigate toward the best possible future, but they can only advise. We have to choose. Advise about what specifically? The French representative asked. Everything. Climate policy, technology development, social structures. They know what worked in their timeline and what failed. But they're also clear that blind obedience to future guidance creates its own problems. We have to maintain agency, make our own mistakes, learn our own lessons. The recovery depends on balancing wisdom from the future with freedom in the present. Marcus spoke up, his experience with the Data Lending Authority. Think of it like getting advice from your older self. You'd listen, you'd take it seriously, but you wouldn't let it dictate every decision. You'd use it to inform choices while maintaining the independence that makes those choices meaningful. That's what we're being asked to do at a civilizational scale. The discussions continued for hours, world leaders grappling with questions that had no precedent. How much should society rely on future knowledge? How could they prevent temporal information from being weaponized? What ethical frameworks applied when cause and effect became bidirectional? How would religious traditions adapt to proof that time was mutable? Sarah found herself at the center of it all, the reluctant expert, the scientist who'd made one choice and changed everything. She answered questions, provided context, explained the physics as best she could. But increasingly, she felt the weight of responsibility shifting. This wasn't just about her anymore. Humanity collectively would decide how to use temporal knowledge. She was just the messenger. General Hawthorne pulled her aside during a break. My daughter would have been proud of what you did. She died believing that truth had to stay hidden. You proved her wrong. You proved me wrong. Thank you for that. I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry the system killed her. The system kills a lot of people in a lot of ways. But maybe now we can build something better. My daughter's death doesn't have to be meaningless if we learn from it. The global transmission Sarah and her team had sent out reached critical mass on the third day. Over 1 billion people had downloaded and examined the data. Universities offered new courses on temporal mechanics. Religious leaders reinterpreted theological texts in light of time's malleability. Artists created works exploring the implications of knowing the future. Humanity was transforming, adapting, growing in understanding, even as it struggled with fear and uncertainty. The messages from the future changed tone, becoming less warning and more celebration. You have chosen well. The pattern heals. The cascade recedes. Your timeline diverges from ours into possibility. We fade as you succeed. This is as it should be. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for trusting us. Thank you for proving that humanity can change. Sarah read those words in the White House briefing room and felt tears streaming down her face. They were fading. The cascade timeline was collapsing, ceasing to exist as the recovery timeline solidified. The future humans who'd sent the warnings were sacrificing their existence to create a better version of reality. They were choosing not to be so that a different humanity could become. The temporal bridge is weakening, Thomas reported from his analysis station. The structures at Sector 719 are becoming less visible, less coherent. Within a week, they'll be gone entirely. The messages will stop, because we don't need them anymore, Sarah said. We've learned what we needed to learn. The rest is up to us. The final message came through on a Sunday morning, 2 weeks after the initial release. Sarah was back at the observatory, which had been transformed into an international research facility dedicated to studying temporal mechanics. She sat in the data room where this had all begun, watching the screen as words appeared one last time. This is our final transmission. Our timeline ends here, not in catastrophe, but in transformation. We cease to be so that you can become. Take what you've learned. Build something better than we did. Make choices we couldn't make. Love each other in ways we forgot how to love. Remember that knowledge serves wisdom, not the reverse. Remember that understanding the universe matters less than connecting with each other. Remember that the pattern heals when truth is shared, when courage overcomes fear, when present action shapes future possibility. We are proud to have known you across time. We are grateful for your choice. Goodbye from the future that won't be. Hello to the future that will. The bridge closes now. Choose well. The signal ended. The structures at Sector 719 faded from observation, becoming nothing more than empty space, dark and silent. The temporal echo device that hadn't been built yet and would now never be built in the same way ceased sending its backwards messages. The bridge collapsed, leaving humanity standing on one side of a chasm it had successfully navigated. Sarah sat in the silence that followed, feeling the absence of the signal like a phantom limb. For months it had been a constant presence, a voice from beyond speaking wisdom and warning. Now that voice was gone, and humanity stood alone again, but changed, transformed by knowledge that could never be unknown. Marcus found her there an hour later, staring at the blank screen where messages used to appear. It's really over. The messages are over. The work is just beginning. We have temporal mechanics to understand, technologies to develop safely, a civilization to rebuild around new knowledge. And we have to do it without future guidance, using only our judgment and wisdom. Scared, terrified, excited, grateful, all of it at once. Marcus, we changed the timeline. We created a branch point that future humanity will remember as the moment everything shifted toward recovery. How many people get to do that? How many people get to sacrifice a future version of themselves for a better present? That's what they did. They ceased to exist so we could exist differently. Sarah thought about that, about the philosophical implications of a timeline choosing to erase itself. It was the ultimate act of love, really, parental in its selflessness. The Cascade future had looked at the recovery future and chosen to step aside, to fade into non-existence so something better could emerge. Emma called that evening as Sarah was preparing to leave the observatory. "I saw the final message on the news. It's really over? The warnings are over. The bridge is closed. We're on our own now. How do you feel?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Like I've been carrying a weight for months and finally put it down. Like I've been given a second chance at everything I failed at the first time. Like maybe, just maybe, I can be the grandmother to Grace that I failed to be as a mother to you. You didn't fail, Mum. You were human. You made mistakes, but you also just saved the world from a cascade you barely understand. That's got to count for something. It counts for nothing if I use it as an excuse to keep choosing work over family. I'm coming to Albuquerque tomorrow. I'm going to stay for a week. I'm going to be present, really present, in a way I never was before. Is that okay?" She heard Emma's smile through the phone. "That's more than okay, Mom. That's everything." The charges against Sarah and her team were dropped 2 months later. The president issued a full pardon, citing their actions as necessary to prevent a cascade of suppression that would have doomed humanity's future. They became heroes to some, villains to others, but mostly they became footnotes in a larger story about humanity's transformation. Sarah's career didn't end, but it transformed. She became a teacher rather than a researcher, helping a new generation of scientists understand temporal mechanics and the ethical implications of future knowledge. She wrote a book about the experience, dedicating it to Michael, whose research had made everything possible. She testified before Congress about the need for transparency in scientific discovery and the dangers of institutional suppression. But mostly, she was a grandmother. She spent weekends in Albuquerque watching Grace grow, teaching her to love the stars while also loving the people around her. She told Grace stories about her grandfather Michael, about the choice he'd faced and the choice Sarah had made. She tried to model the balance between curiosity and connection, between understanding the universe and understanding each other. General Hawthorne retired from military service and wrote a memoir about the suppression protocols and her daughter's death. It became a bestseller, sparking reforms in how governments handled transformative scientific discoveries. She and Sarah became unlikely friends, bound by shared experience of standing at the threshold of revelation and choosing courage over comfort. Harold published his suppressed research from the 1980s, adding it to the growing body of knowledge about temporal anomalies throughout history. He gave lectures about the pattern of suppression and why it had to be broken. At 78, he found new purpose in helping build the recovery timeline he'd once despaired of ever seeing. Yuki and her team made breakthroughs in understanding the structures that had been at Sector 719, developing theoretical frameworks for how future humans might eventually build them. The work was generations away from practical application, but knowing it was possible changed everything. Humanity had a direction now, a goal that unified rather than divided. Marcus took over as director of the observatory, transforming it into the leading research center for temporal mechanics. He built a memorial wall, listing everyone who'd fought for scientific truth across generations, including those who'd been suppressed and silenced. "So we remember," he said at the dedication ceremony. "So we never forget the cost of hiding truth. The world didn't become perfect. Crisis and conflict continued, but something fundamental had shifted. People approached problems differently, knowing that future humans had given them a chance to choose better. Transparency became valued over secrecy. Long-term thinking gained traction over short-term profit. Connection mattered more than isolation. The pattern was healing, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. 3 months had passed since the final message, and Sarah stood once again at the observation deck window where this journey had begun. The stars looked the same as they always had, constant and distant, uncaring about human dramas playing out on one small planet in an incomprehensibly vast universe. But Sarah saw them differently now, not as objects to be studied and catalogued, but as destinations, as homes for future humans who would build the structures she'd glimpsed at the edge of time. The observatory had returned to something resembling normal operations. They still studied deep space, still processed data from the James Webb Telescope, still pushed the boundaries of human understanding. But the atmosphere was different now, lighter somehow. The weight of suppression had lifted, replaced by the excitement of discovery shared openly with the world. Sarah's mission journal lay open on her desk, its pages filled with observations spanning 30 years of astronomical research. The final entry was dated today, and she read it aloud to herself as she wrote, wanting to hear the words, to make them real through voice. Final entry, 3 months after humanity's choice. The temporal bridge has closed. The warnings have ceased. We stand at the beginning of the recovery timeline, uncertain of our path, but certain of our direction. The cascade was avoided, not through superior technology or brilliant insight, but through simple courage. The courage to share truth even when hiding it seemed safer. The courage to choose connection over isolation. The courage to trust that humanity, given full knowledge, would make wise choices. Perhaps we will. Perhaps we won't, but at least now we have the chance. She closed the journal for the last time, setting it aside with a sense of completion. This chapter of her life was ending. Another was beginning. She'd been invited to deliver the keynote address at the International Temporal Mechanics Conference in Geneva. 3 universities had offered positions. Her documentary team wanted to film her story, but she declined most of it, accepting only the teaching position at New Mexico State University, where she could stay close to Emma and Grace. Marcus knocked on her office door, carrying 2 cups of coffee. They'd developed a ritual over the past months. Morning coffee while watching the sunrise over the desert. Simple and ordinary, and exactly what Sarah needed. "Have you seen the latest surveys?" he asked, settling into the worn chair across from her desk. 73% of people globally say they believe the temporal communication was real. Another 20% are uncertain but open to evidence. Only 7% think it was an elaborate hoax. 7% will never be convinced, no matter how much evidence accumulates. That's okay. Doubt is healthy. It keeps us honest. The James Webb detected something interesting last night. Not Sector 719, that's still empty, but a new region on the opposite side of the observable universe. Similar spectroscopic anomalies. Not as pronounced, but definitely there. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, old habits dying hard. The scientist in her wanted to dive into the data to understand this new mystery. But the grandmother in her remembered that Emma was expecting her in Albuquerque for Grace's first birthday party. Document it carefully. Run full analysis. Share it with the international community immediately. This is exactly what we talked about. No more secrets. No more suppression. Let humanity collectively decide how to investigate. You're not going to study it yourself? I'll read the papers. I'll follow the research. But my time as a primary investigator is done, Marcus. I've had my great discovery. Let someone else have theirs. She drove to Albuquerque that afternoon, the desert landscape rolling past in familiar patterns. 3 months ago, she'd made this same drive fleeing toward family after months of neglect. Now she made it eagerly, looking forward to cake and presents and the simple joy of watching her granddaughter discover the world. Grace was walking now, unsteady but determined, her small hands reaching for everything within grasp. Sarah spent the afternoon at floor level, following Grace through Emma's apartment, seeing familiar spaces from a new perspective. This was what she'd missed when Emma was young. These small moments that mattered more than any scientific discovery, these connections that made life worth living. That evening, after Grace was asleep and Emma's partner had gone to bed, Sarah and Emma sat on the balcony, drinking wine and watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Do you regret it?" Emma asked. "Everything you went through? The fear, the threats, the possibility of prison? Was it worth it?" Sarah thought about Michael, dead before his time from the stress of pursuing truth. About Harold, living with decades of regret for choosing silence. About Hawthorne's daughter, who'd chosen death over complicity. About Grace, sleeping peacefully inside, whose future had been changed by one choice made at the right moment. I regret that I had to make the choice at all. I regret living in a world where truth had to be fought for instead of celebrated. But am I glad I made the choice I made? Absolutely. Without question. Every day for the rest of my life, I'll know that when it mattered most, I chose courage over fear. How many people get to say that? Dad would have been proud. Your father made this possible. His research, his sacrifice, his trust that I would make the right choice when the moment came. Everything I did standing on foundations he built. They sat in comfortable silence, mother and daughter, watching the same stars Sarah had studied her entire career. Somewhere out there, future humans were building the structures that would create the temporal mirror. Centuries from now, or millennia, they would complete the bridge that had already saved their past. Time was strange that way, circular and linear simultaneously, cause and effect dancing around each other in patterns that defied simple understanding. But Sarah didn't need to understand it completely. She just needed to trust it, to believe that humanity's future was worth fighting for, that truth mattered more than comfort, that connection transcended time itself. The universe was vast and strange and filled with mysteries that would take generations to unravel. Sarah had contributed her piece to that unraveling, had added her observations to the great catalogue of human knowledge. That was enough. That was everything. Grace would grow up in a world transformed by knowledge of temporal mechanics, by proof that time was mutable and humanity's choices mattered on cosmic scales. She would face challenges Sarah couldn't imagine, make choices that would echo forward through centuries. But she would do it with full knowledge, with complete truth, with the wisdom that came from seeing clearly. The pattern was healing. The cascade had been avoided. The recovery timeline was real and solidifying with each passing day. And Sarah Chen, who'd spent her life studying the distant past of the universe, had helped secure its distant future. Not bad for an astronomer who'd almost forgotten what mattered most. She raised her wineglass to the stars, a silent toast to Michael, to Harold, to Hawthorne's daughter, to all those who'd fought for truth across generations. To the future humans who'd sacrificed their existence for a better timeline. To the recovery that was just beginning. The universe gazed back, eternal and infinite, and for the first time in her life, Sarah felt she understood its message. Not through equations or observations or data analysis, but through the simple wisdom of lived experience. The message was connection. The message was love. The message was that knowledge served humanity, not the reverse. The message was that patterns could heal if people had the courage to break them. Sarah smiled, finished her wine, and went inside to kiss her sleeping granddaughter good night. Tomorrow would bring new mysteries, new challenges, new choices. But tonight, surrounded by family in a world transformed by truth, she was exactly where she needed to be. The stars could wait. Grace needed her grandmother present. And presence, Sarah had finally learned, was the greatest gift she could give.